Protesters in Israel have vowed to continue demonstrations which broke out after Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition introduced new legislation to curb judicial reviews. The Reasonableness Bill removes the Supreme Court's power to cancel government decisions it deems unreasonable. Joining me now to discuss the latest is best-selling author Rabbi Shmuley Boteach. Rabbi, is this a minor correction, as Benjamin Netanyahu suggests, or are these protests justified? They've caused mass disruption now for months.
Well, Israel's the only free and democratic country in the Middle East, so you're never going to see these kinds of protests anywhere else. You're not going to see them in Saudi Arabia. You're not going to see them in Qatar. You're not going to see them in Syria, obviously. So it's just a demonstration of how free a country Israel is. Look, the judiciary in Israel is a very important check on government action, but it also has become its own oligarchy. You have judges and defense attorneys appointing judges. Here in the United States, of course, the electorate has a say in who the judges are because a democratically elected president will appoint or nominate Supreme Court justices based on his term and his administration. Israel doesn't have that. So everyone agreed there had to be some kind of judicial reform. The fact that a lot of the country is opposed to these reforms and says they've gone too far, well, they're exercising their democratic right to oppose it. The fact that the government has a mandate to institute these reforms, that's what democracy is all about. But one thing I do want to say is that those who are dumping on Israel and saying Israel's falling apart and all this, I remember at the height of COVID when Australia was in total lockdown, so most of the world was. I remember after George Floyd was murdered by a corrupt cop, I remember millions of Americans in the middle of a once-in-a-century pandemic were marching all around. There was a lot of violence. A lot of people got hurt. In Israel, no violence. No one's getting hurt. They're just protesting something, and we'll see if the Israeli people will work it out.
Well, yes, democracy isn't dying in Israel, as some of the more hysterical pundits have suggested. But are these really about the legislation, or are these protests about Bibi being elected again?
Look, I think it's a bit of both, but I think the latter plays a very important role. I've known Bibi Netanyahu for more than 3 decades. He's an indispensable leader. Look, under him, Israel has opened its diplomatic relationships with Latin America, with India, China, countries that Israel had very little relations with before. The economy has become a supercharged, technologically based economy, not the way it used to be, an agricultural-based economy. Also, terror incidents, although they're still very significant because so many Jews are being murdered by Palestinian terrorists, it's still very, very significantly down. And Netanyahu is now the longest-serving prime minister. And it seems as though at times those who cannot defeat him at the polls, and Israel is a free and functioning democracy, they're having these demonstrations. I have nothing against the demonstrations except one thing. You shouldn't be shutting down Israel's only airport. That's problematic. Israel's a tiny country. I think Australians just don't understand how tiny Israel is. I was in Dubai when they shut down the airport, and I was stuck in Dubai. And you don't have to always shut down all the main arteries, et cetera. But democratic protest is what Israel's all about. And I wish that Israel's Arab neighbors were able to exercise the same kind of freedoms.
Now, Rabbi, you've written a great piece for Breitbart asking why Democrats want to destroy Kennedy on Jews and Israel. He is now a presidential candidate. He is running to be the Democrat nominee, but he's been labelled an anti-Semite, but you say that conceals the big picture. Tell me what you mean by that.
I've rarely seen one party come after one of its own the way the Democratic Party has come against Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Let's just still remember, Robert Kennedy is Bobby Kennedy's third child, second son. He's his namesake. Bobby Kennedy was killed in June 1968 by a Palestinian terrorist who murdered him because of his strong support for Israel in the 1967 Six-Day War. Now, Bobby Kennedy has expressed more support for Israel than any Democratic candidate for president in decades. He speaks openly about the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, being one of the most moral militaries on the face of the earth. He speaks about the Jewish people as the indigenous biblical people going back 3,600 years to ancient times. He speaks about Israel as the only country where Arabs themselves in the Middle East have any kind of freedom. We don't hear that from President Biden, who's giving us a new Iran deal, which Bobby opposes, a new Iran deal that will give the Iranian mullahs $100 billion. We all know what Iran does, right? They murder women who don't cover their hair. They stone women to death. They hang gays from cranes. They're an abominable, despicable, monstrous government. And President Biden wants to give them all this money. So I don't endorse candidates, but Bobby's a good friend. Bobby Kennedy represents a mortal threat to the Biden presidency. You have an 80-year-old president, and I'm happy that he's strong and robust, but no one's running against him. So there's no one challenging him. You suddenly have someone from the most storied political dynasty in American history running against Biden. What they decided to do is character assassinate him completely. He is not an anti-Semite. That is a dirty, disgusting lie. He's the most pro-Israel candidate in the Democratic Party running for president today. And he's always been a great friend of the Jewish people. And most of all, he lost his father to a Palestinian domestic terrorist, Sirhan, because his father, Bobby Kennedy, supported Israel.
It seems absurd to be calling Kennedy an anti-Semite. When you've got the Squad, the Democrats tolerate the virulent anti-Semitism of some members of the Squad because it suits them. It's convenient. Rabbi Shmuley, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Rita. God bless you. Thank you.